I've been looking for a good time. I've been looking every day. I've been waiting for the sunshine. It's been coming my way. And it's been coming my way. I've been dancing at a hold down. Love to chew the fat with folk. I've been sipping on the moonshine. I've been telling dirty jokes. And it's been coming my way. And it's been coming my way.
Hey everybody, this is Richard Sachs. I'm your host from Lost Arts Radio. This is our show for the 28th day of May, 2017, Sunday night. And you know that for the last several shows we've been talking about many interconnected environmental health hazards, some in the general atmosphere coming from geoengineering or specifically made just for you, like vaccines, or things in the atmosphere such as microwave radiation. And on that last topic, we've had guests talking about the rollout of 5G, which is the latest step, at least the one that I know about, that where they're wanting to put millimeter wave generators outside just about everybody's house and all over the rural areas and coming from the sky, if they can manage to do it partly through blimps or satellites or other things too. And I wanted us to get more specific detail on what's happening with that program, just so that we know what we're dealing with, and then we can talk about solutions from a more educated viewpoint. So I was looking at different people that could do a great job on helping our education in that area, and we're really fortunate to have Susan Clarke with us tonight, who has been an environmental health advocate for more than 30 years now, founder of Environmental Health Advocacy League, which is also known as Enhale, ENHALE, and she's been telling Congress and health agencies and probably government on all levels about the hazards of things as diverse as indoor air pollution and microwave radiation. She's an expert, recognized expert on the bioeffects of the microwave radiation, and she knows what's going on with 5G, as well as considerable background in chemical hazards and nuclear fallout and all kinds of radiation problems. And so she's here to talk about the coming 5G network with us. It's already starting, and where that's leading and all the implications of it. So anyway, I'm really grateful that we got such an incredible guest on this subject, and anxious to see where it goes. So thanks for being here, Susan. That should be a really interesting talk.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm really glad to be here.
Okay, so what I wanted to do for people that are new to the subject and new listeners and people that are not really clear on what 5G or even the microwave situation is at this point is to not only go back to the basics of that, but start to make it personal for you, the background that you came out of before you got interested in this subject, and then how it led into it, and then we'll get into how the microwave radiation situation is evolving and what's happening with that now.
Okay, there's actually a kind of funny part about this, and I sometimes call it a great spirits joke on my life, which is that I had a profound disinterest in high school in the sciences, in biology, chemistry, and physics, in part because I saw animals being terribly abused in biology. The formaldehyde was nasty. The chemicals that came out of the chemistry lab were horrific and stunk up the school, and so on. So I had sort of no interest from the start. I had no interest in law because I saw it as arcane and just so, difficult. I ended up doing science and law and loving it and embracing it as one of the ways that we defend ourselves in this, at this critical moment of Earth's history, where life on Earth, all life on Earth, is threatened with total extermination, with eco-genocide. So I embrace these things that were at one time very unattractive to me. At the time, I was most attractive to music. My mother is a musician professionally and an educator. I came from a family of educators. My first degree was in education, but I was a professional musician as well. I had been performing from early times, and I won an award from the Philadelphia Orchestra when I was 16, and I went on to do a master's in music at New England Conservatory. It was in orchestral conducting. I also had all the credits for another one, so another master's. So I was very much a professional musician, but I became very badly injured by pesticides and electromagnetism. I actually had some exposures well prior to that had weakened and weakened and weakened me. I had even had a near-death experience from pneumonia at one point that was very enlightening. And then went on after those injuries to be close to death for more than a decade. Not with near-death experiences, but close to that all the time. In a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And my question, my big begging question of Spirit was, please give me some health, any health, a little bit, even a little bit of health, and I'll do anything for you. I'll walk straight into the White House for you.
So the response was, you have a deal.
Absolutely, I've got a deal, and more than a deal, because I'm very highly motivated to do these things now that I've learned more. Mm-hmm. So I spent a decade actually at Harvard School of Public Health working toward a doctorate and being a research assistant there, and then a research assistant at another institution. I was the person who brought in top lecturers also to Harvard. And it actually came as quite a huge surprise to me that by 1995, Harvard was sending me out as their so-called expert on the various topics related to, for example, inhalation neurotoxicology, and then by 97, I was the resident expert on radiofrequency microwave radiation bioeffects. So I was very, very shocked by all of that. But it's how it happened, and I'm grateful that it happened that way. But what I want to tell you actually right from the start about 5G is that just as with chemical exposures, where there's a more complex chemical mixture or mixture of chemical compounds, there's more bioeffect. That means there's more adverse effect upon people, animals, plant life, and so forth. With regard to 5G, part of the reason why it's so hazardous, not just risky, now I'll explain why that's an incorrect and inaccurate term, if you wish, but
risk means there may be damage and there may not be, right? And there's a certain percentage of chance that there would be.
So-called. I mean, of course, no one can really determine that risk in the first place. So this whole notion of risk analysis is scientific, pardon my term, but BS start. And it pretends to be analytical and quantitative, and it's not. It's just based on an irrational concept.
The more accurate term is just damage, right?
Well, it depends what we're talking about, right? A risk is the likelihood that something will occur. In this case, a harmful outcome. It's a dualism, black and white, right? But that's not what's happening here. Electromagnetism that is at base unnatural in its by many, many parameters is harmful because it doesn't go with the biological system. It doesn't go with Earth's system. Back in the 60s and 70s, there was this concept that was very strong. In some people, it still exists, that, between natural and unnatural. And when they would say unnatural, people would naturally grasp that there was something wrong and something harmful with it. And they were right on target with their intuition, because Earth's life system, this biosystem, BIOS, is a system that can be disrupted by way of things that are from outside the system, right? So, for example, even engineers, I say even engineers because sometimes engineers are the toughest nuts to crack, if you will, when we think about harm to biology. And it's because of the training that they've had. They've been trained and trained and entrained not to think about the biological side of things by a wide variety of means.
Yeah.
One is by way of being told, oh, biology is the soft science, but you're in the hard science, right? And so there's this pride that goes along with it. Oh, biology is just soft. Mm-hmm. And also they never study bioeffects of anything in their entire education. It's just not there. So to come back to complexity, we've got, first of all, pulse modulation. That means that these waves are not pretty sine waves, pretty curvy sine waves, such as is the light that comes from the sun and from other cosmic sources. These are rather broken up, digitalized, pulsed. They literally go on and off, many times per second. And what people don't grasp is that we're reactive to that. Our very central nervous system is responding all the time, on, off, and even many times, many thousands of times per second. And we may not realize that this is why we're having difficulty sleeping or thinking or focusing or responding to problems or being at ease, why we can't, for example, come into a blissful state, which is what we were born to be in, right? In this Garden of Eden as it once was. So when we look at complexity, there are all sorts of other things that are complex about 5G and 4G, 3G, and so forth. 5G it goes beyond anything that has ever been seen before. It goes far beyond any G. For one thing, it has a broader bandwidth than all of the bandwidth that's ever been used in human history combined. So this doesn't compare with any G generation, fourth generation, third generation wireless with radio, TV. It goes way beyond that in terms of its capacity for data speed per second, okay? Because imagine the bandwidth. If you have a small bandwidth, only a little data can pass through that. Mm-hmm. But if you have this massive, unbelievably massive bandwidth, likewise, huge amounts of data can pass through per second. And all of those data, our body is reacting to all the time.
Okay.
I once had, for example, let me just give a quick example.
Yeah.
I had a friend who was trying to illustrate this to people, and he held up his hand, and he said, look at my hand. He said, every radio station, every TV station, every signal from law enforcement, every CB radio from every trucker is passing through my hand right now. And someone in the room said, oh, don't exaggerate. And I said, but that's exactly true.
Right. Okay, well, you're bringing up some really important points here. I want to make sure that everybody really gets the magnitude of what you're saying. And the first thing that we went through quickly is this incredible idea that I really hadn't ever looked at before, which is the shape of the waves affecting, well, being one of the reasons for the radical difference in effect. And I understand, I think, what you said, but I want to make sure that the rest of our audience does. And if they don't know what in the world do you mean by a sine wave, I think if you look at a scope, like an oscilloscope or some kind of piece of equipment that shows the fluctuation of the energy coming either from the sun or from a smart meter or from any kind of radiation source.
Or a good source, like a living being, a human being.
Yeah, or a body, right, because we're transmitters. And so what you were saying, if I understand you correctly, is that when the nature of that signal changes gradually, then the picture of that gradually changing up and down cycling signal comes out as a curve on the scope, a nice smooth up and down curve, which is known sometimes as a sine wave. But when there's no signal, and then there's suddenly a radical pulse of energy, and then no signal again, or back to background, and then another pulse. Then you get spikes instead of a nice curve. And I think that's what you were saying was the difference between the two. Is that right?
Yeah, let me make it clearer with this example. Fluorescent lights. The old fluorescent lights with the long bulbs.
Yeah.
That are in every government building, every school, post office, right? Okay,
Right.
which are actually really hazardous, really harmful to brain health. Mm-hmm. They impair the brain.
Okay.
The reason why they're called efficient is because they respond immediately and directly to the alternating current. So here this alternating current goes on for a 60th of a second, and then it goes off for a 60th of a second. Then it's suddenly on, and it's on steadily, and then it's off. And so if you can just take your finger and go with me, go on, and then move your finger over for a 60th of a second, right? Then down for off, and then over for a 60th of a second that it's off, and then up again. And
it's not just on and off, it's reversing polarity every time it comes on, right?
Right. But what I'm trying to help people draw is a square wave, right?
Okay, got it. Right.
Now, the reason why this is very harmful is that our brain doesn't work this way, right? Our brain is on all the time. So on, off, on, off, on, off. It's not necessarily the case that we feel the off signal so much, but we sure feel the on. It's like on, 60 times per second.
Okay.
Or in Europe, in some places, 50 times per second, right? It's a strobe effect.
Now, let's add into that, since you mentioned fluorescent lights, how that creates light in a fluorescent bulb.
Okay, so it's on, off, right? It's off half the time, right? But it's a flicker, a strobe effect. And there are many people who have, let's say, a seizure condition, and we'll put them into a seizure, any kind of fluorescent bulb. So then you take these newer compact fluorescent bulbs that are being suggested and pushed, actually shoved upon the public by the climate change people, mostly, right?
Right.
And these now have a much higher frequency. That means that they're going on and off about 1,000 times per second rather than...
They're still a strobe light, in other words, right?
It's still a strobe. It's just the strobe is less perceivable to us, yet it still has this effect on the brain. Think of in audio what we have, what results when we have that on-off. It's like a buzz, like a motor sound.
It's like a very fast machine gun shooting light.
Yeah, just consider, for example, a gas-powered lawnmower right outside your bedroom window when you have a headache. Okay?
Right.
Okay, what does that do to you? It's going on, off. Consider also the sound of some insects and why we don't like them. They buzz near us, right? That's an on-off square wave type of sound, which we really don't, we react to it badly, right? Our brain doesn't like that at all.
So strobe-type signals, whether it's light or sound or unseen frequencies, are irritating to the natural system.
Yes, to the natural central nervous system. So these things are sort of fed into us, and what do? Well, they kind of agitate and irritate us. They prevent us from getting into the blissful state that we were born to be in, as I said, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
And they interrupt our interactions with other people because we have a baseline agitation that we're not even conscious of.
What about these fluorescent bulbs that are sold as being natural, what do they call them, sunlight bands of radiation?
What they've done there is just change the color across them. And of course, the color is another harmful aspect of standard fluorescent light bulbs. So they say, oh, well, we'll just put a little blue or violet into them. And of course, it's a bit of an improvement. But
it allows plants to grow from I know what they call them as full spectrum,
right?
For plant lights and fish tanks and stuff.
Right. So they're better in that regard, but it does nothing with regard to the fact that it's still a strobe light.
Okay. I didn't know.
It's still harmful to plant life and to fish in aquariums.
Wow. I think if our audience gets this one point, this huge point that you're making about the strobe type effect of sound, light, or any radiation frequency being incompatible with the natural electrical system of the human body, that right there, that makes this whole episode worthwhile.
I think that people also can understand this by way of thinking of analog, a continuous signal, as opposed to digital, a broken up signal. So guess what? All our music became after vinyl records went the way of certain things, right?
Wow, yeah.
Suddenly CDs came in, and now, and there are people who are very sensitive to the
So
sound.
you're saying that all the digital stuff is all on the strobe principle as well?
Yes, it is.
Wow. Sorry, I mean, I know wow is not a really brilliant comment, but it really seems like such a huge point, and I wasn't aware of this at all, and I'm somewhat educated on these things.
Yeah. So this is pulse modulation. It means that the modulated and that it's the modulation that carries information or data, right? So this pulsation, right? And with regard to 3G, 4G, 5G, and so forth, it's not even a regular pulsation like a fluorescent light bulb is. It's irregular. It may pulse, then not pulse.
Yeah.
Pulse.
So, by the way, just for context, what about the old incandescent bulbs? What were they?
Well, they ran, and they still run, right, on alternating current. So what would happen? The filament inside would start to burn, right? Then the current would go off. But would the filament stop burning? No. It continued. It may have been a little weaker than it was, but really not very much, right? The filament was burning even when the current was off. So
then it's not a reversing signal then.
Right. It's a steady signal, which is why incandescent bulbs are actually much healthier.
So it's better for your brain and your body, and that's why they're being outlawed right now.
That's correct.
And for the environment and to save the earth, they're selling the ones that are full of mercury.
Yeah. So it's a reverse, it's a fallacy. It's a complete fallacy.
Okay. So, and actually that's the point that you didn't mention, is that in fluorescent light bulbs, it's the mercury and other things inside that are producing luminescence in response to the varying pulsing current. Is that right?
Yes, the mercury vapor, and of course that's what creates the enormous hazard which will happen to every one of those light bulbs. If
they all break eventually.
They will break. And where will they break? They could break in your home. They could break in your hand. They can break in a landfill. It doesn't matter. They're going to break. So why ever buy one?
Is there any scientific justification why they happen to choose the mercury element to put in there to respond to the current and make light?
There is no need for them at all. We had a perfectly good lighting system by way of alternating current, if you accept that alternating current in itself is a good, which I don't, by the way.
Well, relatively speaking, compared to the digital stuff, it is, I guess.
Right, because keep in mind that alternating current itself is digital.
So you're saying that ultimately it would have been a lot healthier to stay with DC?
In some ways, yes, but I'm saying that electricity itself, the electrical system, as delivered from a faraway electrical plant, trying to get to homes, right, is an enormously inefficient, energy inefficient, and also harmful system. If we had instead, like if you really are attached to electrical devices, then obviously the way to power them is through some power collector, whether you want to do that through solar or wind or like local, like your own solar panel.
Yeah, and like your own house, right.
Well, the thing is not a whole house necessarily, because that presumes also that you've got to power everything through the circuit board, right?
Okay.
Why not have power to device? Power to device. Then you have just enough power that you need for that device.
So one collector or generator for each device.
That's what I would recommend, yes. And what does that do then? Let's say if you're doing solar. It means you're going to want to be a little bit kind of outside a little more, right?
Yeah,
which is good for you, right?
It's easier to collect sunlight on the outside for sure.
It sure is, right? And the military has these big fabric-like solar panels that just fold up, right? They're huge. And they just lay them out on the ground and it powers lots of stuff. Anybody could have that if only we had access to it. We're being prevented from having access to that. And then, of course, I know you go to the next level, which is free energy.
Right, yeah, which is unlimited source.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, boy, this is really interesting. So, what has been chosen for us is the very things that are, if you look at a little bit longer term vision, they basically are designed to, I hate to sound like a radical extreme conspiracy theorist, but they're scientifically designed to destroy life.
Well, look, humans get their minds together to do evil on occasion, right? And humans also come together to do good, right? And that's what we're doing, presumably on this show, right?
Right.
Bringing people together with good intentions to do wonderful things, to bring the planet to its blissful state that all of life deserves. So, and there are these forces on the earth that want to digitalize and pulse everything and make it as unnatural as possible. Why? Because it causes suffering, even low-level suffering. And
but what we've been taught is that it's wonderful progress and digital. But almost nobody has any idea what digital means, but they know it's really good.
Well, they think. Yeah, they've been taught. They've been programmed to think that, right? And how are they programmed to think that? By way of screens. First of all, the TV screen, right? All sorts of video display terminals, VDTs, that are all around us. There are things that are overt, and there are things that are implicit. Every movie that's out there, the language of technology, which I don't even use the word anymore. I'm using it in quotes here, right? Because it's actually a word that is associated with a lot of programming, a lot of mental programming, right? It's actually a god in our culture. It's a mythical god, and progress is associated with technology, and it's another mythical god to which everyone is supposed to bow and which you don't dare question, right? So as long as you are in the cultural religion, you're just going to flow with those things. But when you start to come away and think, wow, but I am not that. So I am different. So does that mean I'm wrong or lesser than that? See, they want you to think that you're lesser than that you don't belong, that you don't deserve to be here. And one of the ways they do it, ironically, is by saying that CO2 and CH4 are bad.
Yeah, that was definitely a mistake of God to create those things.
I mean, carbon dioxide and methane, okay? These are, but naturally occurring molecules on this earth. They're part of the earth functioning system. They're how earth works. So when people involved in the climate change movement have been programmed by way of repeated language, no, carbon dioxide is bad and methane is bad, then they see, in my exhalation, I produce carbon dioxide.
Yeah, finally we realize we're the problem. And it reminds me of a bumper sticker in the 60s that was after a build-up to that, and it said, "Save the earth, kill yourself."
Exactly. That's what they're trying to do, subtly, but certainly. Yeah. And we are not the problem. We are the solution. Our bodies, our very bodies that, yes, produce CO2 and CH4 from one end and the other, we are good, okay? We are really good. I mean, I don't necessarily go with the various scriptures of the world and mythical things about them, but, when this earth was sort of declared good by spirit, I think most of us would agree that the biological system, that Earth's Garden of Eden was and is at its foundation good.
Yeah, it's still potentially like that. I also want to go back to something we went over for a few minutes, and that is, since we've got you here as one of the few qualified teachers of these things, and obviously from both sides of the brain, right and left, which we're putting together right now, which is rare, as you know. Most people don't think from both sides. And so let's go back and take advantage of this rare chance to say in terms that people can understand, and this is pulling back the shroud of mystery over some of that technology you're talking about, what really does digital mean?
Okay, digital means something that is a signal that's pulsed, that has transients, it has spikes, as to use your term. That was a really good term. A digital signal has spikes in it, and those spikes interrupt brain electrical function in subtle ways. They also allow that all of the data that are being carried by every radio, TV station, every cell phone call, all of those data are flowing through everyone's brain, everyone's cells at every moment. And there's a kind of overload that those of us who were born in an earlier era sort of have, if you will, psychologically adapted, if not biologically adapted, to process so that we can still function and behave as we were kind of told to when we were kids. Right?
When you say that the digital means spiked energy pattern, digits usually refer to numbers unless they're talking about fingers and toes and things. And so would the numbers in the word digital refer to the magnitude of those spikes, or is there any connection?
Not necessarily. And that's actually another thing that I'll talk about. But magnitude or amplitude or intensity or concentration we need to get to. It's what the engineers look at first and solely, exclusively, and it's all they know to look at in general. Except that obviously there are exceptions to the rule, and there are some wonderful people out there, so I don't mean to say that across the board, but it's what is trained in them to look at solely.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, what we're talking about here is a choice of, again, it's a dualism, like the word risk. It's a yes or a no, an on or an off, a 1 or a 0, and that's all you get.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what's the connection to the ones and zeros that are the basis of a lot of computer language?
Right, that's all you get.
That means on and off, basically, right?
Right. But life is not based in ones and zeros. Life is based on a steady spectrum.
Cycles in a smooth waveform, right?
Yes, across many, if you will, many colors. Okay, I'm going to use the word colors here because if I may switch over to the right brain for a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've having had a near-death experience, I was interested to look into others' experiences of that sort as well. And numerous people have described seeing colors other than the Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and indigo, right, that we see, right? And of course, infrared, what we call infrared, is a massive portion of spectrum. Ultraviolet is huge too, relative to this tiny little spectrum that we can perceive with our eyes that has all these wonderful colors that we love, and yet we're told by people who have been there and back, independent of each other, that there are other colors.
Right. I've heard the same thing.
Yeah. So I just want to think about that for a moment because obviously we know that there's this massive electromagnetic spectrum that we cannot perceive with our eyes. And if we could, we would be seeing different colors than we currently see. And that would be probably really wonderful. Just think all across that spectrum. It's not black and white and shades of gray. It's like all different colors. It's this beautiful spectrum.
So on that whole spectrum, or at least it's probably nothing compared to the whole spectrum, but the part that you're talking about that's much bigger than visible light, is it all characterized by smooth waves instead of spikes?
Cosmically, yes, that's what we receive from the cosmos.
Okay.
These wonderful curvy waves. And in fact, there's, to shift to the left brain again, one researcher, Henry Lai, who's now retired from Washington State University, said about pulse-modulated or digital radiation from telecommunications signals that there is no signal in the entire universe in existence like this. So what does this mean then when from this Earth there are signals like this, highly unnatural signals that Earth is putting out? And by the way, they don't stop. They keep going through the entirety, potentially the entire universe.
Right.
So Earth, by way of humankind, is putting out these extraordinarily unnatural, unnerving, if you will, agitating, irritating signals to the rest of the universe.
So Earth as a planet is broadcasting chaos on this level.
It's chaos and it's also specifically irritation.
Right.
Agitation.
Wow.
And, if there is any life out there, and of course, who knows, but those or conscious brains out there perceiving this, they can see there's a lot of trouble going on.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. That's a great picture of the bigger context of the whole thing, and the fact you wouldn't even have to wait. Well, a lot of questions come up at once. Do you know when the first fluorescent light bulbs came out?
I don't. But the electrical system was getting into place in the early part of the 1900s. Many people had their electricity connected, let's say, in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And they were very conscious, by the way, that they would say, well, everybody on the block had lights on at night, but we didn't for a while because they didn't come to our home yet. There are stories like this from people who are close to 100 years old, and they're still conveying this to us, what it was like at that time. I wanted to say something else, though, that I thought was important here. If we can come back to 5G just for a moment, because this is kind of an essential concept about complexity of 5G.
Okay.
Because complexity, again, is what creates adverse biological effects or biological disruption. With 5G, it's not just one wavelength, like the PCS cell phone system was that came out in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Each company had its own wavelength, and depending where you were, there were 6 to 8 companies. So technically, you actually did have more. There may have been 6 different wavelengths happening at one time, along with all of the TV stations and the radio stations. Okay? But your phone itself, if you had one, and I've never owned a cell phone, and I never will.
Yeah, good.
In principle, I need to be able to tell people in public meetings, no, I don't have one.
Right.
Even though the saturation, as the industry boasts, is 120% of the population, right?
Yeah.
I don't have one. There are people, I know personally, another 5 people right off the top of my head who don't own a cell phone and who never will.
Right.
Right? We stand against that system. In any case, that old system used wavelengths that were more or less the size of, or various dimensions of the human head. Okay, and that's a critical point too, right? But 5G uses simultaneously a wavelength about 20 inches long. If you can put your hands out that, let's just do this, all of us who are listening. Do this physically so that you really grasp the concept.
Right.
Okay, and this is not just a nice curve that goes up and down and comes back. This is a pulsed, broken up wave of about 20 inches. What does a 20-inch wave do? Well, think of it this way. As a wavelength approaches body part size, the absorption of that radiation increases exponentially. Okay, what that means is that you get a whole lot more of that radiation as it approaches body part sizes, right? And we have many different sizes, like every person's head has many different dimensions, right?
You're starting to talk about the same geometric principles they use when they construct a dish to catch signals.
Yes, absolutely. And
so the body is a dish.
And when an antenna itself is constructed, right?
Yeah.
An antenna, and the thing is, it doesn't have to be exactly the same size. It can be in various fractions of that size or various multiples of that size. So something that is twice as big or half as big or 3 times as big or or 8 times as big or an eighth as big. Sometimes they even use 3/8 and 7/8 and 5/8 for antennas. Okay, anything that's sort of in that multiple or fraction of that size is also going to be very absorbent. So it's not just that dimension itself. Okay, so but let's just take a look first at the cell phone system of the 1990s, and maybe 10 to 12 inches for a wavelength, right? And then you think of adults' sizes of their heads, various dimensions. I was speaking with a guy from was it Maycom, I think, the Microwave Corporation in Burlington, Massachusetts. He was an engineer, an RF, or radio frequency engineer, and he said to me, and I'll try to replicate his voice just as he said to me, "They couldn't have picked a worse wavelength for the cell phone system. That's the size of the human head." And that's how he said it to me. Why is it the worst? Because it's the most absorbent. In other words, you absorb a whole lot more radiation than you would, say, from an AM signal that's miles long.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
here now, consider
So the old AM radio had such a huge signal,
a huge wavelength.
a huge wavelength, sorry, that it wasn't an obvious factor in the size of the human, so people didn't absorb it very much.
It's not as absorbable. Yes, it's absorbed,
Okay.
but it's not as maximally absorbed, as optimally absorbed, as was the cell phone system of the 1990s, which, by the way, is still operating. It's still there from all these cell phone towers and from people's phones and whatever. It's still going, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then we had 3G, 4G, right? So
Right.
4G, okay, now much more Wi-Fi everywhere. What's the size of a Wi-Fi wave? About 5 inches. Okay, so now we're even more like the size of your head and also a child's head, right?
Right.
What do they do then with Wi-Fi? They put it in every school by demand, right? The schools are given tons of money to receive Wi-Fi, and they won't even consider keeping their old wired system. Not old, but they had a wired system that was perfectly good and that was working, and they removed it. They ripped it all out.
Except you don't get the money if you leave the old system in. Right.
Right, exactly. So here then, Wi-Fi in all the schools. And Barrie Trower, as you've had on the show, is very, very clear about that, so I won't go into that. But what size signal is that? Again, you get down to like that 5-inch, in some cases 4-inch wave. You get something that was very close to the microwave oven.
What size is the microwave oven?
It's the same size as Wi-Fi. Okay, about 5 inches. So why was a 5-inch wave chosen, approximately, for the microwave oven? It's because they were thinking of, what's the approximate size of a hunk of food that might be in the oven that they might want to cook quickly, like a hunk of meat or something like that, which is kind of disgusting. And of course, they wanted maximum absorption, so they picked a wave that they thought would be approximately the size of what would be cooked. So for the original cell phone system, yes, they picked the size of an adult head because they knew it would be mostly adults that would be using.
Yeah.
And then for Wi-Fi, they picked the size of a child's head and threw it into the schools so that the children would be most affected. Right? Well, also adults, easily, because we have, the dimensions of our heads that are the same.
The multiple, right.
Right. Not even the multiple, right? It's essentially the same, of the size of the brain, right?
Right. Right.
And also of other critical organs, right?
Yeah.
I once was speaking to a crowd in Westport, Connecticut. The governor was there, as was the siting, what they called the siting council. This was a group of people who decided whether a cell tower would be placed or not in a particular location, and took away local control by way of that. And 2 Verizon guys were sitting right next to me in their black suits as I presented. I had only a few minutes to present, so this was the one thing that I could get across to them. As a wavelength approaches a body part size, the absorption of the radiation increases exponentially. Okay, and I'll say it even more sternly soon, but I just want to say, and then I said to them, I held up my hand in a vertical manner, and I said, do you have any body parts this size? Because I wanted the men in particular to get.
Yeah.
Because that's where it's going to be absorbed. Now, by the way, as biological beings with different kinds of tissues that have a lot of moisture, are like sponges for this radiation to begin with.
Well, and you've got 65 to 80% water in the body overall as well, right?
Right, and the water absorbs it, but also because the water is sort of distributed here and there in different ways. So we actually get hotter spots than others in our bodies because some spots are just more absorbent than others. And so the radiation will kind of go to those spots.
Right, so your brain and your heart and other things like that would be big absorbers, I guess.
Yeah, and actually the neck and ankles. Why?
Okay.
Consider this. When you're standing outside on the ground and you are semi-grounded as you can be,
Yeah.
consider what would happen if lightning came down and struck. It strikes from the top because it wants to move to ground, and it would use your body to move to ground, right?
Right.
If that were to happen. And so as that radiation, or as that, I should say, in this case, not radiation, but as that electricity moves to ground, it comes in your head, and then it has to go through your neck, so it actually is squeezed into your neck, so it's concentrated in your neck, right? Then it is broader, and then in your ankles, it concentrates because they're thin. All right, so those two places actually, or three rather, are where this most concentrates when we're just like walking out in society, and the ambient radiation from the local cell towers and people's Wi-Fi in their homes and so forth comes at our heads and moves down through our body to ground. We're getting a high concentration also in our neck and ankles.
Okay.
Now, but to come back to 5G. So first of all, we have this now 20-inch wave. So if you don't mind putting your hands at a 20-inch distance, that penetrates the human body very, very well. And it is sort of maximally absorbed in a baby, frankly. And the baby's height is actually an important factor. People don't always grasp this. Why is the baby's height an important factor? Consider this. When RF, radio frequency engineers, are up on top of a building, they have to make, let's say, to fix an antenna that's broken or to put a new antenna up there or something like that. Right. They have to be very, very careful to make sure that all the other antennas are off, especially FM and TV antennas. Why? Because the higher FM frequencies and the lower TV frequencies are wavelengths that approach that man's height, or half of his height, or twice his height. And he could get fried, electrocuted, just like that, if accidentally one of those antennas is still on. And this has happened over and over again. So they're very well aware of it. It used to happen on the old Navy ships. And many of the engineers are very, very aware of this, the older engineers. In the 1940s, they'd have these big radar transmitters, and a soldier or sailor would be told, okay, go clean the deck. And he'd go mop the deck, and he'd start mopping in front of the radar dish, and he'd fry instantly. Why? Because his body was approximately the size of the radar wave, and also because it was high intensity, and he's right in front of it. Right. Instant death. And so the engineers usually understand that concept very well, but what they don't grasp is the, if you will, the colors of that spectrum. It's not just instant death or nothing. It's suffering and torture in between. Okay?
Well, and it's a lot of things that would be diagnosed as disconnected. So it doesn't go back to the real source of the problem, right?
Yeah, obviously medical doctors are taught not to know anything about this. And I could go into detail about why that is, because I personally observed that going on at Harvard School of Public Health. I'll give you just one example.
Yeah.
I was appointed to ghostwrite the new revised chapter in the textbook that is used at Harvard to train medical doctors to become public health scientists. Mm-hmm. And that book, it had one chapter on physical agents, which can be things like temperature and gravity and barometric pressure and electromagnetism.
Okay.
So there was one little portion about all of electromagnetism, from electricity in the walls all the way through TV and cell phone systems. One paragraph that was not even 2 inches in height. Okay, it was like 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches on the page.
instead of what it should have been, which is 100 pages or so.
Oh, yes. Okay. So I was appointed to write that portion of that chapter and to write it fully, give it the coverage that it deserved.
Okay.
So I was in the process of doing that, and one day I called the editor with a question, and he said, yeah, I forgot to tell you, we can't really have this portion be any more than 2 inches on the page.
Did he mention why that was?
No. And I, of course, did, but you're talking about what it was at that time, which was 20,000 studies. You've got more studies on this than you've got on smoking, on benzene, on lead, on the major hazards that everybody agrees on. You've got all of these studies. You see, and that number of studies is actually super important. It's actually criterion to a public health scientist in determining whether something is a hazard and how hazardous it is. So, for example, if you have 9 good studies, 3 human, 3 animal, and 3 cell studies that show cancer in one way or another, you've got a probable carcinogen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, so what happens when you've got many more than 9 cancer studies, right? And you've got about 20,000 studies altogether by that point, actually more than that by that point. You've got something that's a certainty. It's certain that it's a hazard.
Right.
And yet somebody got to this editor, apparently, and told him, no, we're not going to do that, and you can't do that, and you have to just keep it at 2 inches. So imagine then the impact on a budding public health scientist who's already a medical doctor, who's never heard anything about electromagnetism of any kind being hazardous, except when it's, a full shock from an electrocution or a lightning strike, or a radar transmitter.
Yeah, it's too bad there were no other restrictions, because if it was 2 inches, you could have said 3 sentences, something like, these are definite deadly carcinogens. You should never allow them anywhere where you're working, and they're proven as catastrophic causes of damage in human beings.
Well, what he did instead was he just decided to keep what he had, which was nothing.
Right.
So
I was going to ask you why Harvard was letting you tell the truth about that stuff, and you just
that's another story that that I can get to if you like. Well, actually, I'll just tell you. So I mentioned before Henry Lai, a researcher from Washington State, and I had brought him to give a lecture at Harvard. He was talking about his mouse studies and how the mice in what's called a 12-arm maze, which sort of looks like a clock with like a circle at the end of each of the 12 things. It's actually a pod. Mm-hmm. There would be food in each of the 12 pods all the way around. Right. And this is placed on the surface, and the mouse goes in the middle. He's placed in the middle, and then he has to go and find some food. Okay, so he goes to one pod, he eats the food there, and then he goes to another, he eats the food there, and so forth, right? Uh-huh. And to a certain extent, he remembers where he's been, and he doesn't repeat himself. He doesn't go back to the same pod twice, because he wants to find food and not no food, right?
Right.
Well, when that mouse is then exposed to microwave radiation, similar to that in a microwave oven, but much, much less intense, none of the intensity, okay, just much less intense, he gets confused. And he keeps going back to the same pods that he's already been at. And he can't function right because he can't remember. Okay? This was not just one study. It was a series of many studies that Henry Lai did. Right. And these were such potent studies that NIH actually then defunded him. Mm-hmm. So he couldn't do it anymore. In any case, he was lecturing these people at Harvard and talking about his study. And one young man who I think was already an associate professor who asked Dr. Lai, so how many studies are there in this field? And Henry Lai responded, falsely, not many studies. Now, he may have made a mistake. In other words, he may have thought that this man was asking him just about 12-arm maze studies with mice. In which case he could say, well, not many studies, because my, 5 or 10, whatever, there may be a dozen studies. Maybe that's not considered a lot. And by the way, that whole concept of many or not many is not a scientific concept. It's a characterization that would be objected to in a court of law. So I later saw Dr. Lai at a conference up in Canada, and I said to him, Henry, how many studies are not many studies? And he didn't answer me because he knew. I think he was offended, but I had to say that because scientists need to learn to speak in truly objective ways, and that's what I help them do, by the way, in their testimonies, in their writings, in their declarations, and so forth for lawsuits. So anyway, so here we were. Henry Lai was in the room, and he answers this associate professor, not many studies. At that moment, the associate professor gets up and leaves the room. And I know exactly why he's left the room. Who cares if it's not many studies? Who cares? It doesn't mean anything if there are not many studies, right? That was his attitude, and I knew it, and I saw it, so I ran out of the room after him. And I opened up my quantitative analysis of more than 50 studies that I had right in front of me. And those were specifically studies that showed harmful effects on humans, animals, and cells in vitro at intensities less than what the FCC allows all of us to be exposed to. Okay? This was happening, by the way. This was happening in about 1998. Okay? And he was shocked. He said, really? I said, yes. And I said, but this is only the tip of the iceberg. I said, this is just what, levels less than what FCC allows. I said, we've got more than 20,000 studies in this field. More than you've got for lead, benzene, everything, smoking. And he said, wow. He said, well, I'm supposed to write this chapter for this, this portion of a chapter for this book. And that's why I came to the lecture. And he said, would you write the chapter? And I said, sure. So that's how it came about.
Wow. And then once you got permission and the request to write it, then you were told you couldn't do it.
Well, after I had begun it, everyone had given me permission, from the full professor who was going to have his name on the chapter through the editor-in-chief. Everyone had said, oh, okay, she's going to do it. And, and I started out in my job to do it. So obviously somebody got to the editor-in-chief and said, no, we don't want we don't want public health scientists knowing about this. And so they're in total ignorance. And that means that even when, let's say, a medical doctor goes to a public health scientist and says, hey, is there anything to this? Right. That public health scientist is going to remember that little tiny paragraph on the page and say, no, there isn't anything to it. There aren't any studies.
Yeah. So the system is really well orchestrated from higher levels of management, but most of the people in it don't know that they're part of any kind of falsification of information, right?
Yeah, at some point I think they start to realize that, but they don't know from the start. That's true. I'll give you yet one more example just to show how this works. I was at a conference, a toxicology conference, with this woman who was in charge of creating a new desk reference book. This is a huge book, specifically for pediatricians, for doctors who work with children. And the desk reference is something that they can go to immediately and find information that they need right away, right on their desk. And she, of course, was not going to even have any information in that book about electromagnetism of any kind, not fields, not radiation, nothing.
Right.
And I told her, this is really important because, look, you've got this whole cell phone system out here now that's completely, never happened before like this. People are using cell phones, kids are using you've got to have this in there. And she agreed. So she said, all right, well, you write this chapter portion, or the chapter, the entire chapter. We're going to add this chapter to the desk reference because you're right, this is important.
And this was for what organization that this was being done?
It was probably the American Academy of Pediatrics, or whatever it's called at the time. I don't recall exactly, but she was the editor of this desk reference. Okay. So I start writing. right? And I'm writing. I'm almost done. And she calls me out of the blue and she says, well, I just want to let you know, we can't have any more than 2 citations. That means like studies that are named in connection with what I'm writing. And both of those citations have to be reviews. In other words, I'm not allowed to cite a single study. I'm only allowed to cite reviews. And I was conscious that at that time, most of the reviews were written by industry.
Right.
And they were completely inaccurate and false. So I said, but you're talking about a body of literature that's more than 20,000 studies strong, and you're saying I can't cite any of that? No. So I said, okay, all right. So I set about doing it. And on another day, she called me, and she said, well, I have some bad news. We're not going to include that chapter. Okay? And it had nothing to do with me, because I hadn't called her. I had agreed to do it.
Yeah. It was just her gradually being brought up to date on what she had to do.
Right. So this is how pediatricians then have no knowledge. They see mothers bringing in babies. The mothers are on the phone right next to the baby's head. And what do the pediatricians do? Nothing.
Right.
They allow it to happen. In any case, let's get back then to the baby, the size of a baby. Now, let's say maybe a baby is about, a particular baby is about 20 inches long at some point.
Okay.
Before I told you twice that as a wavelength approaches body part size, the radiation absorption increases exponentially, now I'm going to add 2 words, toward resonance. Resonance is where the body part or whole body becomes an antenna.
Right.
So this is what happens.
And it starts vibrating at the same frequency as the received signal.
Yes, essentially, and the radiation absorption is maximized. Okay, this is what there's maximum damage. This is like the RF engineer who's on top of the building and accidentally one of those antennas that is about his height, or 2 times his height, or 3 times his height, or half or a quarter of his height, or whatever. One of those antennas is still on, and he gets electrocuted.
Right.
Okay, so this is where, so 5G has as its fundamental wavelength, and people don't talk about this. They're only talking about the millimeter wavelengths. I'm telling you, there's a 20-inch wave in there. That's not a millimeter wave.
How do those 2 fit together?
Okay, I'm going to tell you that now. Remember, complexity of the signal. So you've got a 20-inch wave that penetrates deeply inside an adult body and really resonates with babies and children's bodies. Okay, then you've got 4 wavelengths that are between 2 and 4 inches in length. Now tell me, what critical organs do we all have that are between 2 and 4 inches in their various dimensions?
All kind. I mean, there's a list. There's quite a few things, right?
Yeah, you've got brain, heart, thyroid, thymus, kidneys, liver, genitalia.
Right.
Okay, and more. You've got everything there.
Yeah.
Okay? So first you've got the 20-inch wave to penetrate deeply inside. Then you've got 4 different ones that are the size of critical organs. Then, on top of all that, you've got 10 different wavelengths that are the millimeter wavelengths, starting at about 1/2 inch and going all the way down to 1/10 inch. What do? They target the eyes and ears and the skin. So this is what gives people skin crawling effects and skin rashes. So every organ and system is directly targeted by 5G.
Wow. And of course, there's something about 5G that you can't have a cell tower every mile or so. You have to have a small cell every few hundred yards.
Well, let's actually wipe that word small out of our vocabulary, okay? You've got a cell tower, okay?
Well, I mean, physically they look smaller, right?
they look shorter only because the equipment's being mounted on a light pole instead of on a full cell tower.
Well, actually, when you look at those cell towers, you see dishes on them.
The antennas are about the same size as what goes on.
So people are mistaking the whole tower for the dish.
Well, it can be a dish, it can be an antenna.
Or an antenna.
There are different kinds of ways of doing it. But that's not the only equipment, of course. They also have to have, because this is such a huge energy sucker. I mean, this sucks energy like crazy. This is totally energy inefficient, okay?
Yeah.
You need so much energy to do 5G with all of these different wavelengths, and to send it from the street into a person's second-story bedroom window, which is the typical way that it gets sent in.
Yeah.
That you need a power supply on every block, a power supply that's about the size of a refrigerator.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah, a big refrigerator, full-size refrigerator. Okay,
Right.
and people will walk by that power supply, and guess what? That power supply is giving off. Well,
that must be a source of dirty electricity, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Anytime you digitalize something, anytime you pull something and it's on that line, on that wire, you're creating dirty electricity. In other words, transients in the electricity. So absolutely. Now, the thing is, they don't have to do it this way. The Russians didn't do it this way. They turned all this down. They said this technology is not even...
I thought the Russians opted for fiber optic systems instead.
That's exactly what they did. Now, the thing is, there's a lot of fiber optic that's...
I mean, there's a reason that the whole media hates the Russians now. They must be doing something really good.
They're doing a lot of things very well. Okay, of course, they do have Wi-Fi everywhere, too, because the people don't know. Okay,
right.
But what are they doing that's right? No GMOs allowed. Everybody,
yeah, that was incredible. A 10-year ban, I think.
Yeah, everybody, and no high fructose corn syrup allowed in anything. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, they're not totally free of centralized control, but they are resisting to such a significant degree that they're being demonized everywhere.
Well, but the government itself is actually allowing no GMOs. No.
Well, and they're encouraging organic farming and giving people land to grow food on.
Absolutely. And let me go into that a little bit, because everybody then has the potential for having a dacha, right? A dacha is a little either country home or a piece of land somewhere. And I heard, and don't quote me on this, but that Russia is actually growing more than half of the food that it uses from these dachas. From these little...
Yeah, exactly. They want to become a huge exporter of organic food worldwide as well.
Exactly. These are victory gardens that we all need to be doing. Every one of us.
Yeah.
Every one of us. Even apartment dwellers. Hey, get a cheap shoe rack that's like a flexible fabric kind of thing. Put a little dirt in each one of those shoe things, right? Hang it from a clothes rack. Buy a window.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and
grow something.
Plant some herbs. That's the easiest thing to do, right?
Yes.
You can do it. Everybody can do it. It's just amazing if you have a home in which to do it. I mean, yes, there are lots of homeless people. I was also homeless by way of my extreme illnesses for many years. And so I understand how that's a different kind of situation.
It is, but there are people in cities like Los Angeles, and I think the guy's name was Ron Finley, that I thought a very inspiring person that has been just starting to use vacant city land for gardening for the people, anybody that can use it. And of course he was attacked by the city, but he had such a strong support that they said, well, even though it's very unscientific, you can go ahead and use some of it for the moment.
Right, yeah. There were many people, though. I mean, I visited South Central, the farm that was then ripped away in order to provide a stock room, a huge stock room building for Walmart.
Okay.
And the beautiful farm that was there, huge nut trees, and that had been there for many, many years and even decades. And that
You're talking about Los Angeles or somewhere?
Yes, yes, South Central Los Angeles, the big farm that was down there. Everybody had a little plot, and there were big fruit and nut trees there, and it was all bulldozed to make a building for Walmart.
Wow.
Yeah. And now, of course, Walmart is closing stores, right? So it probably doesn't even need that, right?
Yeah.
That was to harm the people in South Central who were learning farming, who were bringing farming to the city.
Right.
From the start, yeah.
Right.
So that's what we all need to do. That's part of our resistance, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And by the way, when we do that, we're also supporting the insects that we really need to be there. Right?
Yeah, because a whole other show topic here is the interface between 5G and bees and other insects like that.
Right, and there are a good number of honeybee studies in particular that are the reason why I tell everyone that wherever 5G is deployed, if there are any bees there, they will be gone in less than a year. In truth, they'll be gone in much less.
You say wherever 5G is deployed. The point is to deploy it everywhere in the world right now. I think that's the plan.
While that's the plan, it's not as quick a deployment as they would like. It's not as quick a deployment as, say, 4G or 3G were.
Yeah.
And so I'm just saying that in that location, the bees will be gone. The flies will be gone. There's actually a 40-acre farm in Michigan where suddenly there are no insects. And at this time of year, when there should be insects everywhere, right? This is May, end of May. There should be ants, there should be flies, there should be bees, and suddenly no insects at all. Right. Now, we haven't figured out exactly what that is yet, but it's a pretty good likelihood that there was some high-level 4G and then 5G that has come in. Let me talk now, because you wanted to also know about the intensity of the radiation, and one of those factors is this. When the late 90s cell phone system first came into being, I should say, because it sure wasn't play. It was torture for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it ruined many people's lives. It killed a lot of people off very quickly. But when that first came into being, the antennas in some cases were semi-directional. They would be aimed, for example, toward highways or toward a government building or something. Okay. And I always question, why are you aiming it toward the highway when it's the worst thing you could possibly come up with to have people driving while speaking on a cell phone, right? That's going to distract people, and it's going to be very harmful. That was even before texting, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, there was no such thing.
Right.
I had one of those early cell phones that weighed about 7 pounds, and it was hooked to the car.
That was actually probably the analog system from the late 80s.
Okay.
If it was that
had an antenna mounted on the outside of the car that was about 2 feet tall.
Yes. You're talking about the analog system of the late 80s, yeah.
What now, was that 1G?
I think that was called 1G, yeah. I'm not real super clear about those Gs.
Okay.
But in any case, so 3G was kind of semi-directional. They could make it so.
All right.
4G, when 4G came along, it was semi-directional, like it was more concentrated into a 60-degree arc. So if everyone who's listening can just kind of put your hands in a 60-degree arc, that's sort of like what you'd find in an equal angular or equilateral triangle.
Right.
Okay, so that's more concentrated. Within a plane, you've concentrated the intensity 6 times, right? And in 3D, even more than that, right? So now, take your hands and move them in even farther to a 15-degree angle. That's what 5G does. Okay, now please take your hands and move them all the way in so that your fingers are touching, that your hands are touching like prayer, okay? Mm-hmm. When you aim the energy in this directed fashion, it's then a maser, a microwave laser, a weapon. Move your hands out then just a tiny bit and come to 15 degrees again, and you see how close 5G is to being a maser.
Just so that I understand what you're talking about, you're saying that are you saying that the generators like the small cells and stuff like that, they will be emitting directed radiation for 5G? Is that right?
It's still technically semi-directed, right? But it's so close.
How can it be directed at all when you have to have it available for cell phones everywhere?
This is not for cell phones. The cell phone system is all in place and it's done.
Okay, so 5G is not about anything to do with cell phones at all, right?
Not really, no. It's about, the only thing that they tout it as being about is being able to download a movie in a couple of seconds.
And what about 4G? Is that separate from cell phones also?
4G has to do with cell phone mobility a lot and Wi-Fi. So, but again, it doesn't matter what they say it's about, right?
I'm just trying to grasp.
See, that's where we get into things that are about intention and motives, and we can't read other people's minds necessarily, right? And the industry can say, oh, this is for this purpose and this is for that purpose, but the real intention is something else, and that's why I don't want to get into intentions.
Right. Well, I didn't mean intention so much as technically what devices these things support.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it can support, for example, and I hate even to use the word support or service, right? Because they always use those, right?
Sounds wonderful, I know.
I mean, it supposedly allows an iPhone to download a movie in a second.
Okay.
As if that's important, right?
Right. I mean, we know that that's one of the most important things in life, but what I was asking is if you have a signal going out in a certain number of degrees, what if somebody is holding their iPhone on the other side of that generator? How do they get the signal over there?
Yeah, and that's because the signal bounces everywhere. It bounces off of everything. It reflects off of surfaces. Okay. So once it's inside, a structure, a human structure, it's going to be bouncing all around.
And you can get it as a ricochet and still download the movie.
Oh yeah, it will be everywhere. Yeah, I shouldn't say that. It would be everywhere if we let it, but we're not going to let it.
Right. But in theory, we would still avoid the catastrophe of taking longer than a second to download a movie because it's going to be bouncing off everywhere. Everyone will have easy access.
Right. All those data coming through that portion at that tiny amount of time means that all those data are also going through our bodies at that amount of time. And it's really, there are people who really feel that, especially people who have metal in their bodies, metal rods or whatever, they can really feel that, and it's devastating.
So 4G to 5G means a radical turning up of the oven that we're all in at this point.
If you want to put it more metaphorically, yeah. It's really, I think the best metaphor is the frogs in the pan again, right? And the frogs have been in the pan for a long, long time, and some of them have been jumping out, right? Yeah. Wisely jumping out and wisely, screaming to others, get out, get out, get out. And many frogs are still embracing the pan as a nice place to be and not understanding because they're told, this is great. Everything is great. You're going to be able to do this, and you're going to be able to do that, and this is technology, and this is progress.
While they're telling the frogs about that, they're raising the sides of the pan, so it's less and less feasible to jump out of it.
You got it. They're raising that, and they're all raising that bar of capacity to escape while they're raising the temperature. Mm-hmm. Now, 5G, according to someone that I know who's sort of high up in military intelligence, says 5G will kill millions of Americans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see that, actually.
Yeah. So that, and probably billions of people across the world. And then, by the way, 6G is behind it. I don't know what 6G is, but oh gosh, 5G is this bad.
Yeah, and it's not just the people that are killed. It's going to change the quality of existence of the ones that aren't killed, I would imagine.
Yeah, no one will be able to function. This is why they want driverless cars. It's why they wanted GPS systems in all the cars.
Yeah, and why they're training the military to manage primarily zombies.
Exactly, and that's why they have the predictive programming movies about them and so forth. So, yeah, that's what is intended. So how do we escape all of that, right? And that's what we really need to do, because really it's the case that wherever 5G comes, there will be no bees, there will be no other insects. There will be, and that will happen in very short order, probably within months.
Yeah, which means the food supply will no longer be normal, and it won't matter if you call yourself an organic farmer or not.
Because it already is very difficult to grow food, as you probably are aware, in part because of other aspects of geoengineering. And 5G is a part of geoengineering.
Right.
And everyone should really look at the site Zero Geoengineering And I would also recommend the site more for 5G. Look at rfemf.com. RF as in frequency, emf.com. And you'll find a lot on those two sites. So here we have this enormous complexity by way of having multiple wavelengths going simultaneously, right? And then you have the digital pulsation, which makes it very, very complex, many times per second, on, off, and irregularly on, off, right? Then you have huge concentration of the radiation into a 15-degree arc. So the intensity is much more powerful than ever before, by far.
Yeah.
And then you have this huge power suck off of the energy grid, so that it really makes the energy grid, the electric grid, much more vulnerable. And then on top of that, you've got the fact that this is very, very near to every home, so that everyone in a home is very significantly exposed. And what does this affect first and foremost? Brain. Immediate brain effects. This is not, oh, there are long-term effects, or we don't know the long. Every activist is entrained, is programmed to say, we don't know the long-term effects. Yeah, we do, first of all. And secondly, do you not even think about the immediate effects? Because the immediate effects are also well known. Right? Sleep impairment, because this suppresses melatonin. Of course, like light, like infrared, it suppresses melatonin. So you've got severe sleep impairment from 5G. That's what will come.
Right. Well, and even if that were the only negative effect, that's enough to eliminate sanity.
Well, it will, because when you eliminate, when you reduce melatonin very significantly, what happens? The person is sort of dysfunctional and not productive the next day, is zombie-like. That's what it does, right? Yeah. I mean, there are all sorts of central nervous system effects. I don't have to go through the list, but there was a long list that was already established science by 1965 because of all the experimentation that had been done beginning in the 50s. The Russians had been experimenting on this much earlier. You know, East Germany, there was a study from 1927. Okay, so this has been studied for 90 years already, with almost 25,000 studies in hand. Yes, probably some of them classified. But military intelligence knows very well what it's doing. And then when you put this together with the various geoengineering programs, which are using electromagnetism in very big ways to influence the Earth as a whole, or large portions of atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And you've got these antennas absolutely everywhere, near everybody's home. It means you can target people, individual people, very, very easily. I mean, it's already easy to do now.
It starts to look like it goes together with the smart grid idea.
Well, yes, and of course the smart grid. There was a very good account by a beekeeper who, like many, like I used to be a beekeeper, and the bees were so gentle and kind and sweet that, you know, we could move them, we could do it without equipment on, we could, and never get stung.
Right.
Okay, and that's how this man was with his bees, and he recounts how the day that the smart meter system was turned on in his area, he went out to take care of the bees, as he always does, and they dive-bombed him.
Wow.
And he could have been killed.
Wow.
That denotes anger. It denotes that the bees were experiencing something that was so horrific, it was torturesome.
Right.
And this is how they expressed it to their best friend, their best human friend.
Yeah. 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 That makes total sense.
There was also a case in Northern Europe, I think it was in the Netherlands, just a few days ago, or last week, where there were cows that simultaneously in 5 different fields with 5 different farmers, suddenly the cows all just went mad, and they were tearing through the fields as if in agony. One of the farmers said it looked like they were in agony.
And this was right after the installation of something in that area?
Yeah, there was a cell tower there, and they don't know yet whether something new was turned on, but that sort of would be the only explanation, because nobody was spraying anything with pesticides. There wasn't any other activity that was happening simultaneously in 5 different farms.
Wow.
Around the cell tower. So, even in my area, just a few days ago, we have no access to any farms that we know of other than a horse farm. But all of a sudden, cows showed up in our backyard. And we have a small yard, and in other neighbors' backyards as well. Cows just walked in. It's so strange. In fact, they were kind of running a little bit. No one knows where they came from or how they got in. But obviously there's something going on, either by way of the geoengineering programs that are, using NBCs, that's nukes, biologicals, chemicals, and electromagnetism, to vastly change the atmosphere. And maybe the cows just felt that they had to get away from wherever they were.
Yeah, they were hoping there was somewhere to get away.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely, is the main topic, like you said, and we do this with so many different interconnecting issues on this show, is, the educational part is about what's going on now, so the baseline situation that we have to deal with. But none of that is really helpful unless and until you figure out some way to make the situation better.
Yeah, when we spoke before the show, you were talking about how we're all here for a purpose now. We came here at this time for a purpose, and I certainly feel that. There may be some people who aren't quite aware of that as yet. I get the feeling right now that people who will be listening to this will be wanting to hear about my initial near-death experience.
I think so too. We're not necessarily determined to reach billions of people here, but we are determined to reach the ones that need to hear what we're talking about.
Yeah, that near-death experience actually was specifically about health. At that time, I was in my early 20s, and I had been sort of running myself ragged. I was teaching school by day. I was performing as a musician in restaurants and clubs by night, and going back and forth to commuting 10 hours per 24-hour period. It was really crazy. And there was essentially no sleep, and it was sort of in the winter time. It was, and the thing is, for a young 20-something, that's kind of fun. It's exciting. It's a big adventure, right? But I came down with pneumonia very, very badly, and so finally, when I could barely walk anymore and barely breathe anymore, one night, my sister helped me get to her apartment. And she put me in her bed because I was so sick. She tried to give me some water and some orange juice I couldn't even swallow. Sometime after that, and she was sleeping on the floor, I was in a lot of pain, and for that reason couldn't sleep. And I started to die, and I knew that because I sensed myself as being out in space, in the darkness, but with stars out in the distance, in the cosmos. And I saw the pieces of my body as these unrecognizable, horribly diseased, they looked like moldy and fungused, misshapen pieces of my body just sort of floating out into space with nothing to hold them together. And they were floating out and out. There was no energy to pull them together. And they were, even if they could be pulled together, they were so messed up, so destroyed, so misshapen, and so unrecognizable that there was nothing left of them to be salvaged. And I knew that I was dying. So I then heard a voice. It was a male voice. And he said, in the most peaceable, tone that I think that I'd ever heard. Do you want to live or do you want to die? And I really can't convey the peace about it that it let me know that it was totally all right. No matter what I chose, it was fine. It was okay. And so because there was so much peace associated with that, not, oh my God, life or death, I was able to very calmly think about it. What do I want to do? And I recognized that if I were going to live, I would have to be protecting my body much better. I would have to work for my health and not just trash it, not just trash my body and health. And so after a time, I thought, well, I think that I'd like to live. and so at that point, I didn't know how, though, because of this impossibility of everything drifting out into space, totally diseased. So I just thought, okay, well, I'm just going to try to pull things back in. And the moment that I set out that intention of pulling things back in, the pieces started to become cleansed and cleaned, and then they were recognizable, and the pieces started to all flow even then quicker. They accelerated back into me, and I knew at that moment that I would live. And I was being healed.
Right.
And because the pain then went away, I was able to sleep. And I actually got a night's sleep. It's very important, I think, because we're at that stage with Earth right now. And we do have the power of our intention, despite the seeming impossible odds. We do have this power of intention to start bringing the pieces back together so that Earth's system can be restored.
Yeah, I think what's so hard for a lot of people in our modern culture to grasp is that these aren't just nice little imaginary things you do in your mind to feel better. They actually have power that we're not supposed to know about. Because if we got access back to the healing power that is our normal state, then the whole game of destroying everything would be over. Resonance doesn't only work on a negative scale.
Yes, absolutely. And we are resonant beings, and we've got many, many wavelengths associated with us, not just one.
Right.
We are very colorful, and we've got many wavelengths, right? And they're all wonderful, and they're positive, right? Or not all necessarily. I mean, we can absorb some bad ones too, right? And sometimes put out some bad ones.
Yeah.
Capable of that. But our bodies are electromagnetic and chemical, and we can do quite a lot with our deep powers.
Right, and there's really two aspects of making things better. One is things that individuals can do energetically to protect themselves, which are barely known right now, but they're definitely there. And the other is reversing the whole trend toward world destruction, so that hopefully some of the people in positions of power start becoming conscious in spite of their intentions and starting to look at things differently.
Yes, and then how do we awaken them? I mean, I think there are both these spiritual ways that are real, that the spirituality involves real physical phenomena.
Yeah.
And they may exist in some cases in dimensions other than the three that we're most familiar with, but they're real physical phenomena.
Yeah. It's easy not to recognize that because there are so many individuals, for whatever reason, claiming that they're doing or can do certain things, and it's not true. But among all of that noise, hidden in it, there are some that really do have those abilities wide awake. And it's an indication that anybody can.
Absolutely. And I think intentionality and especially determination are extremely powerful. I mean, during those times in the early 90s that I was just begging Spirit, just please give me a little help. I'll do anything. I'll walk straight in the White House, right? Well, it happened that I was staying in a home at that time because I was essentially homeless, but sometimes people would put me up in their homes. If their home was reasonably chemical free and not terribly electromagnetic, I could actually be there. Otherwise, I'd be in my car.
Yeah.
I was that sick, and of course completely incapable of earning money. But this one woman heard me expressing, that I so wish that I could just go to Washington and get something done. She would hear me talking about that. And all of a sudden, she appeared one day with a round-trip plane ticket for me.
Oh, wow.
And she was putting me up in her home, and I couldn't turn it down. I mean, I thought at that time there was no way I could get on an airplane and survive just because of the chemicals alone.
Yeah, I mean, now they have Wi-Fi on the plane that's generated inside the cabin.
And in most flights, it's horrible.
Yeah.
So, in any case, I wrapped myself up as if it were winter and the trip was in June.
Yeah.
Heavy, long coat. I had my hair completely wrapped. And everybody thought that people were guessing. They actually came up.
This is like the next step beyond tinfoil hat, right? You're wearing an entire Faraday cage, basically.
Yeah, I was actually all white all over.
Right.
And people say to me, are you part of some religious cult?
Right.
I got there, and of course I was very, very sick when I arrived for days. And finally I sort of recovered enough that I could actually go on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another, and by the next several times that I actually went there, and using different means. I never flew there again. I always drove the 12 hours through the night or whatever. I could never use any heating or air conditioning or anything in my car, but and I'd have to drive straight through. But I would do that, and I had my oxygen tank and my respirator with me, and I would walk up Capitol Hill. I also sometimes had to wear an iPad. Yeah, and you can't do this anymore, but I would drag my oxygen tank into Congress, and I couldn't make any appointment with anyone, so I would just stop in with these very nice legislative aides, and I loved talking with them.
Yeah.
And would give them some powerful scientific and legal information. I'd have handouts ready. And so I started to pepper Congress, and then I started to meet other people. They would say, well, have you met so-and-so, and have you met so-and-so? And they would lead me to other people and other agencies. And in early January 1994, I happened to be in this very toxic law office where renovations were happening. And an attorney said to me, would you mind, it's after hours, but please, would you sit in this room and just answer the phone? It was after 6 o'clock. And I said, okay, because he was going to help me with these matters. So I had to just stay there and put up. I knew I was going to be very, very sick the next day from the chemicals in the building. And I just stayed just because I knew he'd help. Anyway, the phone rang, and I would take these messages, and all of a sudden a call came in from the White House. And they said, we need Tom's materials. He's supposed to meet with Al Gore on Thursday, and this is Tuesday, and we don't have his materials yet. And we need his materials, like, now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of smiled, and I put on my very best phone voice as if I worked at this place, which of course I didn't. And I said, oh, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And I knew nothing about it. I didn't know Tom or anything. So anyway, I took the message to the attorney, said, oh, yeah, that's fine. We'll get those materials in tomorrow to Al Gore, no problem. And I said, could I submit my materials to Al Gore too?
Yeah.
And he said, oh, no, that's completely against protocol. Inside the Beltway, you don't ever do that. You don't ever ask for some kind of favor like that. And I said, you could submit your materials too. And they said, well, yeah, I suppose we could do that.
That protocol is really just a guideline rather than a rule, right? To paraphrase Ghostbusters.
So I immediately called all around the country to the people who were still open. I said, please, you've got to send in the morning, you got to, like, send now, okay, you've got to overnight things to this law office, and they will go in a package that will go to Al Gore tomorrow, okay? So all the people in Mountain Time and Western, Pacific Time, they sent all their stuff and went in the package, and of course I was sick as hell the next day. I was just on this futon on the floor, and I thought, I can't waste 202 time, which is, Washington area code, because at that time it still cost a lot for me to call into 202 when I was back at home up in Boston. So I just opened the phone book to the blue pages, which are the government agencies,
Right.
And I started calling every office in Health and Human Services.
Okay.
And I put on my best phone voice. I had a terrible migraine, and as I even put my face close to the phone book in order to read the phone number, I would be reacting to the ink so badly.
Yeah,
It was just like I just had to do it. And so I'd say, hello, we've just gotten these important materials to Al Gore yesterday. Perhaps you'd like them too?
Right.
Okay, so suddenly my associates in Mountain Time in particular were getting just orders upon orders upon orders for these materials. I went through the entirety of Health and Human Services, my friend.
Wow.
Every office in every health agency.
If Al Gore wants them, of course we want them too, right?
Of course, because we need to know what Al Gore is reading, right?
Yeah, that's really going to keep us up to date on later.
So although I didn't physically walk into the White House, I got all these materials into the White House without, and that's where the meeting was, at the White House, without having to walk in.
So why, with all this wonderful education, how did Al Gore get so confused?
I'll talk about that in a moment. So yes, but at that time, which was early January '94, people believed this is it. We finally got someone in here who's going to do something good, and so people went out of their own initiative, and they set up all kinds of excellent toxicology conferences. They were exposing things that they'd never exposed before because they thought they're finally free to do it. And one woman, I was in my presence, she was with 2 Washington Post reporters, or Washington Times, I forget, Post. And she said to them, for 12 Reagan-Bush years, we were told never to say that anything was harmful. And so obviously now she feels free to speak, right? So everybody thought that they were free to speak at that time. Right. This was before the gates came shutting very quickly, closed.
Yeah.
In any case, so people were actually from out of the agencies doing great things that they thought that they were free to do without losing their jobs. And there was...
What year was that?
This was 94. Well, all of 93 and 94, this was happening.
Okay.
Until November 94. Okay. And see, it was when the Gingrich Revolution happened, the Gingrich contract with America, which we all call the Gingrich contract on America. That's when the people in the agency suddenly thought, oh no, we can't do this anymore. Now we're stuck. And the whole Clinton scandal started to come up. And then Al Gore was being literally sent to Eastern Europe to tell them that nuclear power is going to be a good thing for you.
Right.
It was like, and everybody is sitting back like, huh? Right? So everybody kind of got enlightened at that time. But in these few critical years, the people from the agencies were actually doing good things because they thought they could. And they set up the Interagency Work Group on Chemical Sensitivity. And that was my baby, if you will. So that's how I got, but spirit, right? Inadvertently, just from my determination and my willfulness, right? Mm-hmm. That's how the federal government first recognized chemical sensitivity as a real condition.
Okay.
As a result of what happened with Al Gore and my getting materials to all of the agencies through a migraine. So the thing is, this determination, it creates, or like the call coming in from the White House when I'm being asked to play secretary for an law firm, like, how often does that happen, right?
Yeah, something good was going on.
Right, it's that determination, and then the spirit world enters to aid us. And I could just tell you, experience after experience where things were absolutely impossible and the spirit world entered in and made it happen.
So that just needs to be translated to now, right? To see
Yes.
all the levels on which people can do positive things.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, today is the day that the Appropriations Committee in California is supposedly voting on Senate 649, which is about 5G, right? And so that's the date that we're recording right now, right? So by the time people hear about this, we'll know the outcome of that hearing.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And we need in every single state to stop 5G before it gets started. And fortunately, there are some good efforts. Even the cities, for example, 16 cities in Ohio have sued their own state to stop 5G. It's extraordinary.
Right. Now there's some kind of a federal system of laws that is overriding local discretion on these matters, right? Like,
well,
I just know a little bit about that.
That's the rumor, and it's false. Okay.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and people keep hearing this. The thing is, they hear something from an industry lawyer that goes to their own lawyer, that goes to their friend, that goes to the advocate, and they hear it from the advocate, and it's false. Okay, what they're talking about is the Telecommunications Act, Section 704. Okay, and it says, I'm going to quote it, no state or local government or instrumentality thereof may regulate the placement, construction, and modification of wireless facilities or radio frequency wireless facilities based upon the environmental effects of the radiation. Okay, now that's the beginning of it, and people have interpreted that to mean that, oh, you can't stop it based on health effects. You sure can. People have been told you can't speak about health effects in your own local government. Yes, you can. Who's stopping you from speaking? That would be a First Amendment violation.
Right. It doesn't say you can't say anything. It says the local government can't regulate the placement, right?
I know how it happened because I snuck into some meetings, some industry meetings with local governances. The industry wined and dined local officials, gave them this big kind of chicken dinner, whatever. I was there. Yeah. and on numerous occasions and all over the country, okay, but I observed two of them. And the industry lawyer would be in front of the room of 300, 400 officials, local and state governments, and the industry lawyer will say, look, the Telecommunications Act preempts some of your powers, okay? And so the thing is, because you cannot regulate on the basis of health effects, you might as well just tell your local citizens that they cannot speak about health effects in their hearings.
I see. Okay.
Okay, so I would jump up with my hand raised, and the industry lawyer would call on me, and I'd say, I'd really love to read that Section 704 of which you speak right now, and I'd read it out to everybody fast. And almost everybody in the room is a lawyer anyway, so their ears are attuned, right? I say, there is no mention of health here or in the entire Telecommunications Act. Nowhere is the word health mentioned. So health is not preempted. You still have complete control over the health effects.
Okay, so what was preempted? The environmental effects?
It literally says environmental effects. Okay, so then, but of course that's in conflict with NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, too. And so many communities actually brought up environmental effects and won on that basis. So you can do all kinds of things that people think that you can't do. And then there were other things, too, because it said, it only regulated the placement, construction, and modification. It said nothing about the operations of the equipment.
So in other words, turning it on is still optional.
The operations of the equipment are still, at this date, right now, completely within the hands of state and local governances. Completely.
So if you can build these things but not operate them, then none of them would be powered, right?
Right.
Okay, exactly. So what people are going to ask is, well, then I can't even use my computer. So that would be terrible.
Sure, you can use your computer. You still have an electrical grid. Plug it into the wall and get wired internet like you had 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's still there. You can still get it. In fact, you can get it through fiber optics now, and it's going to be a lot faster. By the way, I didn't finish telling you earlier what the Russians actually did, okay, because I know someone who was working with the largest telecom, which is MTS.
Uh-huh.
They ran fiber optics to every home and even every apartment in the large cities, so that everybody has the option, if they want super, super fast, super reliable, super secure, super unhackable internet, they can get it. That doesn't mean that a lot of people aren't going to continue to use their Wi-Fi, but they have the option of the best service in the world, which is fiber optics.
Yeah, I think that's the fastest, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. It's
now,
glass.
aren't they making some devices now that are incapable of plugging into Ethernets?
Yes, they are. The thing is, fortunately, there are little things that you can get. You can just order them online that can allow you still to connect to Ethernet cable.
It's an adapter for those things?
Yeah. So, like, if for a MacBook Air, that doesn't allow an Ethernet cable, you can still go in through USB, I think it is, and then from there to Ethernet cable.
I see.
And then from Ethernet cable, you can go into your fiber optics.
Okay, so it turns a USB port into an Ethernet cable port, basically.
If I remember correctly, yeah, that's what it does.
Okay, wow.
Yeah,
I didn't
so
know.
there are many options. And the thing is, there are all kinds of shielding materials that people use. I mean, one of the very best things that people can do is get mud or clay. People think, it's dirt, right? It's dirt. No, it's wonderful stuff from the earth. Take some earth, right? Hopefully it's moist. You can add a little water to it, right? Put it in those big Ziploc freezer bags, and put a bunch of those bags together inside another maybe plastic bag. Put a pillowcase on it and use it underneath your own pillow. Or make a smaller one and put it on top of your head. Put it around your head, even better. And then you're going to have a completely different night's sleep.
Wow, that's interesting. Even though it's not connected to the major part of the earth physically, it still has the effect.
Absolutely, because it's earth and rock and
it's saturated with the resonant frequency of the earth.
I don't know that I put it quite that way, but the fact that it's got moisture in it means that it's extremely absorbent of microwave radiation.
Oh, I see. It's a buffer kind of thing.
Yeah, and you'll sleep so much better.
You have to keep replacing that all the time as it gets used up?
Not necessarily. I mean, what you can do, if you want to kind of preserve it so it's not just all mold or something, you can put it like in the freezer, overnight, or I mean, not overnight, but at times, or you can put it out in the sun so that it gets some differences of temperatures, right? Okay. I mean, it's like any pillow. I mean, I once had a toxicologist tell me, every pillow should be out in the sun for a day and then in the freezer and then use so that you get rid of all of the various kinds of things that grow in pillows.
Right.
So any kind of pillow kind of needs that cleaning anyway.
Right.
But yeah, and then in the ears, see the connections between the two innermost points of the inner ears are very critical with 5G radiation because it can connect there, and it can actually a maser causes a seizure by going through those two innermost points. And there are actually Tai Chi masters. I've studied with one of them who was actually 100 years old or so at the time, who advocates putting fingers in the ears and just sort of holding there and getting good energy going between those 2 points, using the largest finger and just holding inside the ears. You've got a good idea to wash your hands first before doing that, obviously. But then also overnight, you can moisten like little pieces of tissue, like toilet tissue, and put it in the ear. And I like to use food-grade hydrogen peroxide that's been watered down to 3% for that purpose, because it also keeps down infection, it keeps away colds and all sorts of things, and it also blocks some of that radiation that's going through there.
Wow, interesting. So the vote on 649 in California, is that the first state that is at that point in the development of this whole system?
No, Florida, for example, already voted in 2 bills to bring in 5G, even though the entire city of Jacksonville had decided to refuse it.
Okay.
And there are other states. There are many states that have this legislation in process. For example, Minnesota had this legislation, and they actually slowed the process down, I think, to watch and see what happens with Ohio, because they don't want to get sued by their cities either.
Okay.
So that was wise of them.
All right. Well, it sounds like there are future installments of the whole discussion that we should have if you get time, as things develop, and see what direction they're going in, and more specific help for things that people can do to try to turn everything around. But for the moment, since we're right about at the end, what would you, after this whole discussion, in a simple form, what would you like people to go away with and to remember? And then also, if there's any websites or any other thing that they want to watch to keep up with what you're doing.
Yeah, I would recommend, again, those websites that I mentioned, rfemf.com. You can even find one of my presentations. It's a 6-minute presentation there on the various things, the various parameters or factors that make the radiation harmful beyond just its intensity. zerogeoengineering.com. We've got some legislation going right now in Rhode Island to slow or stop geoengineering projects there, and that could be spread to any state in the country easily. So be on your guard about that, because you can do that.
Okay.
And I would say, just in conclusion, that, yeah, we're at this point, all of us, as physical and spiritual beings on Mother Earth, of deciding collectively life or death.
Right.
For all of Earth. This is eco-genocide that's intended. I want to take a step back at this moment and recommend that everyone watch the video of the English version of Ronald Bernard, okay, and listen very carefully to that. And we need to decide, are we going to choose life or death? And then follow whatever determination, whatever leadings, whatever guidance you have internally, and just do it, because you can do far, far more than you think you can do, because the spirit world is there to help you.
Yeah. I would like to leave it at that, and I think the last thing you said is of immense importance, because usually that deeper and more subtle awareness is rarely mixed with what people call science now. And when you put the two together, then all kinds of amazing opportunities open up.
Absolutely.
Right. So I'm really grateful that you came, and I hope that we can do it again. And hold on, and we'll say goodbye in the break here in just a minute. All right, so there goes Susan Clarke, incredible guest. Thank you, Susan. Unusual depth of perception and so-called left-right balance, not political left-right, but left and right brain hemispheres that allow some unusual people to perceive really well in the so-called objective intellectual scientific worlds, and in the more subtle arenas as well that are kind of beyond language in the normal sense. Susan is an example of one of those people. And this show really gave, besides just being a lot of information, that some of which was new to me actually, and I learned a lot. I appreciated it. Fluorescent light bulbs and all this other stuff, and kind of an overview of the incredible network network of assaults against humanity that are going on now in a coordinated fashion. The EMF and Wi-Fi attack is only one of those, and it's much more than even the average conspiracy theory person doesn't really comprehend, in my opinion, the real magnitude of it. It's on multiple levels. It's coming from much higher up than they realize it, way above the visible level of the government. And working on these individual issues like the Wi-Fi and the chemtrails and the GMOs and the nuclear power and all the different stuff, those are all really important, and they're doing great work, and they're very valuable. But I think alone they're not, I'm not trying to be negative, okay, at all. It's just, realistically, if we want to be successful, we have to see what strategic position we're in. And I think that if we just work on one issue at a time, it's not going to be quite adequate to do what we need to do and succeed and reverse the trend toward total destruction. And as I've mentioned before, especially on the Saturday show, which is now getting more outspoken, even though that wasn't my intention or plan in the beginning, but that's what's happening. And I think that we need something more in order to turn this around. But I think we still can, in spite of what it looks like, and we have an option that could work. And it's not a special, plan of how to attack these so-called bad guys or anything, because most of the ones we see are not the ones in charge anyway. Even the ones that we see as higher up are not the ultimate higher up ones. But we have an ability that we've forgotten, and from what I've been able to tell in decades of research into all of these things, health and consciousness and world affairs and all of this interrelated stuff, our rulers want to make sure, above all else, that we never discover this ability that we lost and that we never become self-aware, because if we do, we can access levels of energy and power that they can't begin to get to, because there are fail-safe mechanisms built into consciousness itself. I'm sure this sounds completely out to lunch and crazy to a lot of people, but we're so late in the game that it's not good to beat around the bush anymore. I have to tell you whatever little bit that I've been able to see and contribute, and there are levels of energy that they can't get to because they have malice. And that doesn't go with the higher levels of consciousness. Where the real power is no malevolent energy at all. And it's not contentious. It's not about fighting and destroying. It's something in a completely different universe of understanding. So if you have any interest in that, and you want to join us and talk about it, on Saturday we have a call-in show. Usually I start and talk about some things I want to go over first, and then take a few calls, and that is on every Saturday at the same time as this Sunday guest show, and that's 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So next Saturday, you ought to think about coming and joining us, or if you're in a part of the world where the time zone doesn't work for you, then email things that you want addressed on the Saturday show, richard@lostartsradio.com, and I'll get to as many as I can. I'd like to be able to talk about what you're interested in, even if you can't call in live, and make it more valuable. That's the whole point. This is not supposed to be like a momentary entertainment thing, or just, being impressive for a minute and then being forgotten. It's supposed to be about things that you can use, and understanding of what's going on in the world, the intent of our rulers to totally exterminate normal life on Earth, because I'm sorry, that's what I see them doing. Not as quickly as they could, because they have the technology to kill us all right now. It's way beyond what we're aware of. But they're not doing that, and I think the reason they're doing it is because it's more like a ritual, ceremonial sacrifice of the biosphere as the sacrificial animal. And if they don't do it by the right steps, then they're not going to please the entity that they're doing this for, and they're not going to achieve the kind of immortality that they think they're going to get, which they're mistaken about. But that's a long story, and we don't have time to go into it right now. But if you're interested in that stuff, talk to us on Saturday. That's what the discussion show is for. So again, thank you to Susan Clarke. Remember to see the two websites that she talked about, which were the letters rfemf.com, like radio frequency, like electromagnetic field.com, rfemf.com, and the other one was Zero, spelled out Zero, geoengineering.com. And she wanted you to go to both of those sites, so let's all do that. And thank you to you for caring about any of this stuff. I really deeply appreciate it, and I believe that you personally are the real hidden hope of the world. And that's the whole point here. The hidden ulterior motive is to remind you of the incredible being that you actually are. It's not like what you've been programmed to believe. You're not limited. You're not temporary. You're not most of the things that you've been taught and programmed to think that you are. You're totally beyond description and beyond incredible. And even though I don't know how to do a very good job of it, my intent is to try to remind you so that you'll follow it up and wake up abilities that you have that could heal this place. That's what I'm after, for the sake of the people that live here now and the babies that are being born and the future generations that are still coming. Whatever we can do to leave them a better place, I really think that would be a good idea to do. So if you want to, go to our two sites. Our main one is lostartsradio.com. Lots of interesting stuff there. The free forum for discussing any of this stuff that interests you. The newsletter to sign up for advanced information on shows and other things. Donate buttons in case you happen to have money and you want to help us keep going. That would be deeply appreciated, but only if you have the resources for it. If you've got some money, that would be great. If you believe in what we're doing and you want to help. There's a lot of articles and videos, all free, that are for educational purposes that we put up there. New ones almost every day. There's Doug's Diamond Report, which all the ones I've seen have been great. That's up there all the time. There's a playlist so you can see the older ones. The Alex Jones Show, which I think is a global treasure for news programming, is up there as a playlist. A lot of the advertising's gone from it, so you can see more of it in a shorter time. I think that's of incredible value. I don't know how long it'll be available because the power structure really wants it gone, but as long as it is there, you can see it every day on lostartsradio.com. What else? That's most of what I wanted to tell you. If you have comments that you want to send in for anything, what you think about the shows we've been having, or ideas that you want to see covered, or things that you want to have talked about on the discussion show on Saturday, if you can't be there in person, I'll look at all of those and appreciate them very much. So the point is, let's learn what we can. Let's practice it and actually upgrade our own awareness and our everyday life and our lifestyle, and make the habits ones we want to have, not just things we're addicted to. And even though it sounds impractical and unreal, what I've found is that doing things inside yourself gives you greatly expanded power to do whatever you want on the outside. So you might play around with that, see what happens, look for ideas, share them with us on Saturday, and meet me back here for the Saturday call-in show if you want to. And otherwise, I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Listen to our new shows with guests every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All new shows and archives are available at blogtalkradio.com/Lost Arts Radio. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lost Arts Radio. We're on Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. Again, youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. And scene.life, we're at Lost Arts Radio/profile. When you do your Amazon shopping, please use Amazon's Smile program at smile.amazon.com. And when you choose Lost Arts Research Institute in Sedona, Arizona as your charity, Amazon will donate 0.5% of whatever your order total is to Lost Arts Research Institute to help fund the building of the school and keep our radio show on the air. Please visit lostartsresearchinstitute.org for more information on the school we want to build. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter on our site under the Radio Show tab, or right from the button on our Facebook page. You're also invited to join our free user forum on our website at lostartsradio.com. You can ask Richard a question there or post about any subject that you're interested in. Our forum is growing, and we'd love to have you be part of that community. We keep it troll-free, so don't worry about others, paid or otherwise, speaking negatively or engaging in some sort of debunking tactic fakery. I closely monitor the forum for abuse, and we have a very strict one-strike-and-you're-out policy, which is why we require you to register your email address along with whatever screen name or username you want to use. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. And if you like Lost Arts Radio, please consider donating a few bucks to help keep us on the air. We spend many hours each week to bring you the best show we can with the best guests around. You can find our donate button on our website at lostartsradio.com. Contact Richard at richard@lostartsradio.com or myself, Doug Diamond, at doug@lostartsradio.com. You can also find me on Facebook, scene.life, and gab.ai at DiamondDisc, DIAMONDISC. My short new video blog or vlog is The Diamond Report, and that can also be found at www.thediamond.report. Thanks again for listening to Lost Arts Radio, and we'll see you again next week.
I've been looking for a good time. I've been looking every day. I've been waiting for the sunshine. It's been coming my way. And it's been coming my way. I've been dancing at a hold down. Love to chew the fat with folk. I've been sipping on the moonshine. I've been telling dirty jokes. And it's been coming my way. And it's been coming my way. Tell me, is it leaving, deceiving, relieving me anyway? I'm hard of hearing, believing, the healing, it happens every day. And it's been coming my way. I could write you out a postcard. I could tell you all the news. I've been fighting off the demons. There's no way that I can lose.